Oh, I'm just coming through the curtain, you know. I don't know. I don't know. There are several ways. Arsenio had his pointing. Woo, 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 the dog pound. I don't know. I got to develop something. I come out, I show you myself. Good morning. Doug Rice. Get up, people. Get up. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. You've already missed half the damned day. Yeah, that's right. Every morning, 7 o'clock. Can you stand it? Of course you can. That's why you tune in. I appreciate it. I do. Thank you so much. 7 o'clock in the morning, the 28th of September. We're drawing this month to a close. How it will end, nobody knows. Looks like they might run out of money. And that ain't going to be funny, folks. Let me tell you, there are government employees that are going to feel the blues. They are not going to be happy. And it's interesting. I look back to the government shutdown of fund during Trump's administration. And all the faces that they put on the air, nearly all of them, were Negroes and folks not breathing the rarefied air of powerful, rich politicians. And it just goes to show, folks, the folks up there who claim to run the show don't give two damns about just the common man. They don't give a damn. And they'll let the whole thing burn down just to give Donald Trump the crown. I got to tell you, folks, it's about time Negroes thought about heading out of town. Good morning. You guys see my corner icon. That is Negroes packed and ready to go. And you should be ready to go. For those of you that don't know, I've been at this since 2001. It's not this most popular show. And, it's just a show that I do. It's the only way I can, lead with the kingdom. Educate, talk about what they don't want us to discuss. On January 6, 2021, I nearly came undone as I watched Caucasity attack its own capital. And the only thing I could think of as I screamed and railed at the TV was, what if it were Negroes? What if it were people that looked like you and me? How would it go? And I can just imagine the bloodbath. I can imagine if Negro, listen to me, folks, it's 2023 right now, January 6th happened in 2021. I will tell you this, you all know it, they still wouldn't have been done. Every Negro in this country would have been looked at with a side eye to this very day. And I guarantee goddamn to you that you walking down the street, they'll have permission to stop you on your way. We'd have been living in a Gestapo state. And every vile and evil thing they want to do, they'd have tried to do it to folks that look like me and you. If that had been Negroes that approached that Capitol with murderous intent, I can only imagine how far they would have went. So I do this show every day, 7 o'clock, Monday through Friday. I'm off on Sabbath. Sunday at noon, my time, you can find me none too soon, and I'll get you out of church, out of the pulpit, listening to that bullshit. You will commit to watching the Doug Rice Show. And that ain't no... All right, anyway, so today, what are we doing today? We go over dissertations. We go over all sorts of publications. We go over PDFs, and good God, what is there left? We read, we define, we try not to malign, we tell the truth. That's what we do. And today, we'll be doing that too. And let me just say, this topic, this subject, kind of dovetails with some of the topics that we've gone over the past few days. I've mentioned Nat Turner and his rebellion over some of the publications we've read over the last few days. But this that we are about to delve into, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Negroes of the Americas and across the world, this dissertation that assisted young Patrick H. Breen to get his doctorate, a full 339 pages of historic power. And all of us will take this hour to peruse. And the point we will not lose. Nat Turner's Revolt, Rebellion and Response in Southampton County, Virginia, by Patrick H. Breen, under the direction of Emory M. Thomas. Now, we're not going to read the abstract. We're not going to do that, okay? Dissertations assist students, professional students, in obtaining things like doctorates and PhDs, all these things. And so we'll read Nat Turner's Revolt by Patrick H. Breen, Bachelor of Science, the College of William and Mary, 1992, MA in the University of Georgia, 1994. This dissertation submitted to the graduate faculty of the University of Georgia in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. So this assisted young Patrick Breen, perhaps old Patrick Breen, who knows, in his doctorate of philosophy in Athens, Georgia in 2005. We're going to review this publication. We're going to review this dissertation. We're going to disseminate this information. Nat Turner's Revolt. Let me tell you something. It's the only time that a Negro stood up in such high fashion. There were a lot of revolts, a lot of plantations, a lot of uprisings, but none that riveted this nation like the revolt that Nat Turner put upon those who put chains upon him. And I can imagine that he had enough. I can imagine that it was pretty rough. I just can imagine. So we're going to go over young Mr. Breen's dissertation, and this is available along with many other PDF and publications that we provide here on the Doug Rice Show. Katrina, the wonderful moderator, manages that portion of this project. And so if you would love to have some of these PDFs, some of these publications, some of these I think rarely found, rarely investigated writings, simply request to have them and I will give them to you. I also will give any PDF or publication I have that you require an entire list for any donation to the support of this effort. I will give that as well. And below, you can peruse the various giving apparatuses that we use to support this effort. And thank you so much. All right, here we go. We got 12 chapters. That's what we're going to do in this show. Okay, I'm going to do 6 today and 6 tomorrow. I'm going to cut it off at 6 if I can. Introduction, signs from God, the first blood, dawn to Jerusalem, which might be interesting. War, flight, retribution, a struggle for order, the trials, confessions, Christian voices. We will not cover the appendices, and of course, we are simply reviewing a moderate amount of the paragraphs in each of the chapters, simply to go over and review what may be disseminated. Now, if you would love to go over in full the 339 pages, I will send this to you upon request, and Trina will give it to you. But I can tell you, as I stated in the description of this, these folks put their heart and soul into these writings because they're looking for a lifelong association educationally, a doctorate of some sort of rank that will never go away. So I need you to pay attention to how young Mr. Breen approached Nat Turner's Revolt. And so let's go. All right, here we go. Let's do it. Chapter 1, Introduction. Just out of curiosity, I'm certain everybody can kind of see this, but I suppose I'll go ahead and enlarge it. Here we go. Chapter 1, Introduction. On the night 21 August 1831, Nat Turner and 4 associates began what became the most famous slave revolt in American history. A small conspiracy. The rebels had caught whites in Southampton County completely by surprise. By the middle of the day on Monday, 22 August, the rebels had killed nearly 6 whites, making the revolt the most deadly, at least in the terms of whites killed, in American history. The initial successes of the rebels, however, quickly ended. By Monday afternoon, the rebels suffered their first defeat. By Tuesday morning, 23 August, the main rebel force was defeated and dispersed. In the days after the rebellion, all the rebels except Nat Turner were captured and killed. There were several slaves who had not joined the rebellion. Despite an intense manhunt, encouraged in part by rewards offered for Turner's capture, Nat Turner remained at large for 2 months. After 2 months remaining successfully concealed, Turner was spotted in mid-October, not far from the starting point of the revolt. A renewed manhunt led to his capture on 31 October. It took a day for the men who had captured Turner to bring him to the jail at the county seat in Jerusalem. Interesting. Thomas R. Gray, a white lawyer who was involved in the defense of other accused rebels, interviewed Nat Turner during this confinement. These interviews led to the publication of The Confessions, perhaps the most famous book on slavery ever published in the South. On Saturday, 6 November 1831, Southampton's court of Oyer and Terminer met to decide the fate of the slave revolt's leader. Their judgment was never in doubt. The most famous American to spend his entire life in slavery was hanged on 11 November 1831. And so he sets the tone, as you see. Young Mr. Breen, he focuses in keen, doesn't he? And of course, we know the end result of his capture, and I don't even think you can call it a trial. It was simply a decision and an execution. But 1831, let me say this, folks. Here's the issue. What else would you expect an individual held against their will and put into slavery, chattel slavery for life, family taken far from where he came from? I mean, what other response would you expect from our oppressor? What would these European cretins do if the roles were reversed? What kind of violent act would they justify through use of their being enslaved? How many would they murder and kill? How many have they to free themselves? How dare they determine with such abject decision to end this man's life without taking into account the life he led? I tell you, I don't look at Nat Turner as anything other than a determined Negro. And every last one of these beings that surround us with a goddamned attitude need thank whatever God they pray to that there are not more Nat Turners to exact the judgment they so richly deserve. Let's move on to page 2, I suppose. I know. Next. Although the revolt had been quickly suppressed, its repercussions were felt far beyond the borders of Southampton County, Virginia. Haunted by the visions of Nat Turner, the Virginia legislature took up the question of emancipation. For the first time since St. George Tucker circulated his emancipation plan in the late 18th century, a significant part of the Virginia legislature urged the adoption of a plan of gradual emancipation, of colonization of Virginia's slaves. In 1831, 1832, pro-slavery conservatives dominated the special committee charged to examine the subject of slaves, free Negroes, and the melancholy occurrences growing out of the tragical massacre in Southampton. The committee recommended that all petitions, memorials, and resolutions which have for their object the manumission of persons held in servitude under the existing laws of the Commonwealth be refused. Thomas Jefferson's nephew, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, then led a floor fight to overturn the recommendations of this committee. Randolph saw the end of slavery as an eventuality. It must come, he declared at the climax of one speech. The only question in Randolph's mind was whether emancipation would be done by legislative action or by the bloody scenes of Southampton and St. Domingo. Many of the Virginia legislators interpreted the recent events in Southampton differently. Randolph's appeal fell on deaf ears, and the legislature rejected gradual emancipation, never to be revisited anywhere in the South before the Civil War. So, obviously, the murderous rampage put upon whites by Nat Turner created a question, a pause for the cause in the minds of these whites. So much so that the nephew of a slave owner famous for his seduction of black slaves, his pairing with them, seems that slavery must end. Well, I'm certain after you've gotten everything you fucking want out of it, and it appears now that the slaves seem on a murderous rampage against white oppression, well, maybe you might be addressing emancipation of that Negro nation. But as you can see, didn't go too far. And I can just imagine these white men and all their power and glory deciding the fates of Negroes, just deciding. And how many deaths resulted, how many uncounted millions were just, given a death sentence at the rejection of trying an earlier emancipation. These folks have a lot to fucking pay for. You understand? The nascent abolitionist movement also absorbed the excitement that Nat Turner had created. Although most abolitionists carefully disavowed any connection to the revolt, I do not justify the slaves in their rebellion. William Lloyd Garrison wrote, in a letter 2 weeks after the revolt. Some, including Garrison, used the revolt as something that would justify their strategy of turning to immediate emancipation. They were scared. In an article published shortly after the rebellion, Garrison crowed, "What we have so long predicted at the peril of being stigmatized as an alarmist and declaimer has commenced its fulfillment." Garrison had predicted woe in his first issue of The Liberator, which had been published on 1 January 1831, and Nat Turner's revolt confirmed to Garrison's mind the prophetic truth of his visions of the end of slavery. Thus, the revolt stood at a pivotal moment in American history. It contributed to the radicalization of American politics that led Southerners and Northerners both to reject the type of gradual emancipation plans that had ended slavery in the North. Nat Turner's revolt was a critical milestone in sectional relations that set America on a course to civil war. Now that is interesting and a point you can't ignore. And so that revolt cascaded through time and created the Civil War. The first attempt to emancipate slaves after Nat Turner's revolt met with just abject no. And I'm supposing that churned and burned and culminated in the Civil War that they fought years later. Now, we're going to move on to chapter 2, because let me tell you something, these chapters are long. This guy did not spare any expense on this chapter, so we're going to keep going. Again, folks, we're going over Nat Turner's Revolt. Please, if you would, like, subscribe, share. Thank you for tuning in. Talk amongst yourselves. Katrina will handle any of the conversational intricacies. I cannot focus on what you folks are saying and on trying to read this as well as I try. So let's continue to chapter 2, Nat Turner's Revolt. Chapter 2, Signs from God. On a winter Sunday in February 1831, 4 men gathered in the woods of Southampton County, Virginia. Each made his way from nearby plantations. Hark came from the house of Joseph Travis, a household that included 7 other slaves over the age of 12. Joseph Travis's neighbor, Nathaniel Francis, owned 11 slaves over the age of 16 and another 3 over the age of 12. One of these slaves, Sam, joined Hark in the woods. Nelson and Henry also came to the meeting, although it is unclear where they lived. Nelson may have belonged to Peter Edwards, who lived immediately next to Nathaniel Francis, close to the Travis place. If so, 33-year-old Nelson was, according to one person, uncommonly skilled and worth at least $400. And had he been mine, I would have not taken $500 for him. Isn't this an interesting conversation? Where Henry lived is a mystery. Although we do not know much about Henry, we do know that he was a man who had the ability to get some liquor, and it may not have been beyond his ability to provide the other drinks that would have helped stave off the cold. Nat Turner called the 4 men together. 30 years later, the abolitionist Thomas Wentworth Higginson wrote an article about Nat Turner for the Atlantic Monthly in which he complained that the biographies of the slaves can hardly be individualized. They belong to the class. Although the biographies of slaves will always be incomplete, lacking detail and texture, Nat Turner's life has been much better documented than all but a handful of American slaves. According to the confessions recorded by Thomas Gray, Nat Turner was born on 2 October 1800, just days before Virginia executed the Commonwealth's second most famous slave, Gabriel, also known as Gabriel Prosser. Nat Turner grew up near the North Carolina line in Southampton County, about 50 miles from Norfolk, 75 miles from Richmond. Before Nat Turner turned 28, 3 different men had owned him. Dear God, 3 different men had owned him. In 1828, Putman Moore, the child of his most recent owner, the late Thomas Moore, inherited Turner. Since Putman was a child, Nat Turner stayed in the household of his master's mother. When she married Joseph Travis, Nat Turner moved with his owner's family to the Travis farm, remaining in the same neighborhood of St. Luke's Parish where he lived his entire life. In 1831, Nat Turner was described as 5 feet 6 or 8 inches high. If he was a hair shorter than the average American male, the typical Civil War soldier stood approximately 5 foot 8 inches. He was probably a little heavier. William Parker described Turner as broad-shouldered, weighing between 150 and 160 pounds. Although only 31 years old, his hair was already very thin on the top of his head. He wore a goatee. Unsympathetic whites described other notable things about Turner's appearance. He had broad, flat feet. He was knock-kneed. He had a large, flat nose and large eyes. Over the years, he had been literally scarred working in the fields of Southampton County. Some animal or person bit the back of his neck. Perhaps it was the same mule that kicked his forehead. He had a knot on one of the bones of his right arm near the wrist, an injury that had been produced by some sort of blow. When whites tried to classify the skin color of Nat Turner, they enigmatically described a man that was a bright complexion but not a mulatto. The historian Kenneth S. Greenberg has reminded scholars that one must be careful not to accept Parker's description of Nat Turner uncritically. After all, this description was composed and promulgated by people who hated and feared Nat Turner. Nonetheless, there are two good reasons to believe that the description is generally accurate. First, the whites who composed it had strong incentive to represent Nat Turner accurately. They created this description to help identify a fugitive. If it were inaccurate, then it would jeopardize their primary goal in composing the description, the capture of Nat Turner. Second, correspondent to the Richmond Enquirer, who later compared Nat Turner to the description, insisted that he fit the description exactly, with two caveats. First, the correspondent found Nat Turner darker than he expected. Second, Turner's eyes were large, but not as prominent as he assumed that they would be. Even these qualifications suggest that the original description was accurate. Neither contradicted the original description. Instead, each showed that the newspaper's correspondent read more into the original description that it contained. Portraits of Nat Turner's family life are as tantalizingly incomplete as descriptions of his appearance. His family life, when he was growing up, seems relatively stable. He later recounted how both his parents, whether both influenced him in his youth, and how he knew at least one grandmother to whom, according to the confessions, he was much attached. Like countless other black families in the South, slavery played a role in the breakup of his family. In the confessions, Nat Turner recalled that the black community believed that his father had escaped to some other part of the country, although protections of legal marriage were antithetical to the American system of slavery. Nat Turner married. Historians have disputed the identity of Turner's wife with at least three different women, Fanny, Cherry, and Mariah, proposed by different people. The earliest reports of Turner's wife indicated that she also lived in the neighborhood on the farm of Mr. Reese. Perhaps the most likely candidate of the three, Mariah, has been proposed by Thomas Paramore, although proof that would rule out any other candidates would never appear. Contemporary evidence for Nat Turner's children is less clear even than the evidence of his wife. At the time of the revolt, no sources mention Nat Turner's children, who would have been too young to participate in the revolt themselves. Southampton's oral traditions filled in a blank. According to it, Nat Turner had at least one child. At the end of the 19th century, historian and Southampton native Thomas Drury identified a son, Redrick. Because slave law ruled that Nat Turner's children would belong to his wife's owner, the children would have lived with their mother on Reese's farm. If Nat Turner followed his usual pattern, he arrived after the four other slaves had gathered. A deeply religious man, Nat Turner had made a conscious decision years earlier to cultivate a persona to present to the world, white and black. He later admitted that he avoided mixing in society and wrapped myself in mystery. Even to his friends, which these men were, he still hesitated to mix with them, afraid that it would undermine his carefully developed image. No one will ever know what Henry, Hart, Sam, and Nelson discussed as they waited for Nat Turner, but it would not be surprising if they were discussing what many Americans were discussing, a recent eclipse of the sun. Here we'll pause for a moment. Let me just say, obviously what we had there was a kind of interruption into the meeting with a short narrative of Nat Turner's upbringing. And what an upbringing, an interesting one at that. And if I don't miss the mark, it appears to me that Nat Turner was extremely educated. I'm going to maybe assume that he might have been able to read, because he's expressed himself well, and they interviewed him just to satiate their need. On 12 February 1831, Southside Virginia experienced an eclipse of the sun. The line of maximum eclipse traced out beneath the moon's orbit traveled from northeast to southwest, from east to Boston to west of New Orleans. Before the solar event, some newspapers reminded their readers that an eclipse was merely caused by the regular operation of natural laws. Despite newspapers' emphatic assurances to the contrary, one suspects that many Americans still saw eclipses as a sign of forerunners of great calamities. The moon's shadow passed directly over Virginia between Norfolk and Richmond. In Richmond, the Inquirer reported that every person in the city was stargazing, from bleary-eyed old age to the most bright-eyed infancy. Slaves who were told what to do and often what to think had the chance to look and decide for themselves exactly what it meant. Perhaps as the men waited for Nat Turner, they debated the eclipse. If they had their own ideas, Nat Turner was going to suggest an interpretation of the eclipse that would lead to the most important slave revolt in American history. None of the four men would have been surprised when Nat Turner arrived and explained to his friends that the eclipse was a message from God to him. Nat Turner believed that he had learned to communicate with God, and he had no secret of his gift to those, he had made no secret of his gift to those in his neighborhood. To him, the natural world was a backdrop against which he discerned messages from God. For example, a few years before the eclipse, he told many of his neighbors, white and black alike, that he had found drops of blood on the corn as though it were dew from heaven. According to Nat Turner, this miracle meant that the great day of judgment was at hand. Likewise, he interpreted the stars and leaves on which he found hieroglyphic characters as signs of the second coming of Jesus, who was about to lay down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men. The end of the world was near, and Nat Turner felt guided by the Holy Spirit to share his knowledge. What an insight into the beginnings of what became the biggest revolt that America will talk about regarding slavery. That's chapter 2. We're going to move on, chapter 3. Listen, you can read the rest of this publication for yourself. You can get it. I will give it to you for free. I will not charge you a dime. I also will give many more publications for any of the donations that you might find. All right, let's move on to chapter 3. Let's see what we might see. This one is good. So that's chapter 2. I know chapter 3 is probably up there. There we go. So thanks for tuning in to Doug Rice Show. It's 7:35, 28th of September. This is what I do. We talk about history, but let's bring receipts. We discuss our experiences within the confines of this prison. This is a penal colony. For others, it's freedom, it's joy, it's the American dream. For us, This is punishment, folks. I need you to understand that we need to wake up to that as a fact and an actuality. And this review, Revolt, tells you the mindset of Negroes under the terms of their conditions and what they would do to accomplish their mission. All right, let's go to chapter 3. Thanks, and tune in to me. Here we go. Chapter 3, the first blood. First blood. On the morning of Sunday, 21 August, Henry, Hark, Nelson, Sam, Will, and Jack met as planned at Cabin Pond. As they prepared the pork dinner and drank Henry's brandy, the 4 charter members of the revolt began explaining to the new recruits their plans to rise and kill all the white people. Jack later told people investigating the revolt that he immediately balked. According to a newspaper account, Jack objected to the proposition and denied the possibility of effecting it. Hark responded that as they went on and killed the whites, the blacks would join them. Jack never reconciled himself to this sketchy plan, but somehow Hark made sure that Jack remained with the rebels. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Nat Turner joined the small band. As he approached the group, he noticed both of the new recruits. He recognized Jack. Immediately, he surmised how Jack had gotten there. Hark had brought him. Based upon his experiences as a scorned prophet, Nat Turner understood that many in the black community would not spontaneously rise to rebel upon hearing his interpretation of the February eclipse or the recent odd appearance of the sun. The revolt would grow by force and suasion. It would grow by attracting the most desperate slaves. Most of all, it would grow as those who had already joined the revolt persuaded their friends and family to join the army. Hark had brought his wife's brother into the revolt. Nat Turner knew both men and understood the influence that Hark had upon Jack. Even though Jack was never fully convinced of the wisdom of the revolt, Nat Turner accepted him without question as only a tool in the hands of Hark. In contrast, Turner questioned Will. Turner asked Will pointedly how he came to be there. Will did not respond by explaining how Sam or one of the others had told him about the revolt. Instead, he told Turner the reasons he wanted to join the revolt. This answer, preserved in Nat Turner's confession, is a remarkable piece of evidence. As Nat Turner remembered it, Will responded. His life was worth no more than others, and his liberty is dear to him. In response, Will appeared different from the generalizations made by the contemporary whites about Turner's followers. One newspaper recorded the way that whites understood the rebels. Followers were a few ignorant wretches whose minds Nat Turner deceived, deluded, or overawed. A letter written about the revolt in North Carolina's governor explained how the rebels had been deluded. Religion had been brought to their aid. These rebels had even come to believe that their martyrdom would be rewarded with eternal salvation. Many have said so when about to be put to death. Will, too, was ready to die, but his reasons were different. Will wanted to fight for his freedom, and he indicated he was ready to lose his life if the revolt failed. As revealing as what he said is to what he did not say. Let's repeat that. As revealing as what he said is what he did not say. He gave no hint that he was impressed by Turner's religion. Will expressed no confidence in Nat Turner as a prophet and provided no reason to think that he had acquired an ascendancy over the mind of Will. In fact, if one considers the hostility suggested by Turner's pointed question directed only to Will, Will seems to have joined the revolt in spite, not because of Nat Turner. Whatever hostilities there may have been between Nat Turner and Will disappeared once Will explained that he understood the consequences of joining the revolt. According to Turner, Will's answers were enough to put him in full confidence. By late afternoon, 7 slaves had agreed to launch a war on slavery. I want to stop there for a moment, folks, because you need to hear this. These men were in their right mind. Most Negroes here today are not. Most of us have forgotten how we got here. We were not invited. The door was not open for Negro to simply swagger the fuck in. This is how we were treated when we got here, and a war against slavery set on these whites during that day shocked the holy hell out of every last goddamned one of them. And good. Good. There's no shame in fighting for your freedom, even under these circumstances. And so I applaud these gentlemen, every last one of them, as you should too. Okay. The odds against the crew at Cabin Pond were as overwhelming as they had been in February. Their greatest achievement over 6 months had been to keep the plot a secret from whites. One white, Coswell Worrell, believed that he had heard a veiled allusion to the race war days before the revolt began, when a slave under his supervision warned him to look out and take care of themselves, that something would happen before long. At the time, however, he did not recognize the importance of the threat. Like the rest of the white community, he was caught completely unaware when the revolt began. The rebels had little else to show for the months of preparation. For weapons, they had only the tools they used every day. When Nat Turner was captured, the whites asked him specifically about the weapons that the slaves had at the start of the revolt. He responded that their only arms were hatchets and axes. While these weapons were sufficient to kill the sleeping families that the rebels found the first night, they understood that they would need more firepower if the revolt were to succeed. Aware that they lacked guns and horses, Nat Turner described his initial force as neither armed nor equipped. Even more desperately than they needed arms, the rebels needed men. After the revolt, whites found among the papers of Turner's wife a piece of paper with a late date which all agree is a list of his men. Turner clearly had some potential rebels in mind. Even if all of those men joined us, the revolt had begun, the total number of rebels would be something short of 20. And as it was, the number of rebels had increased in number from 5 to 7, but one of the 2 recruits, Jack, was hesitant, not certain that this revolt was how he wanted to end his life. If this revolt was to be anything more than a suicidal mission, they needed to make a large number of recruits quickly. Finally, despite the months of talk, they still lacked a plan. According to Turner's confessions, only once Nat Turner arrived at the feast did they agree upon their first target, the farm where Hawk and Nat Turner lived. Having decided to attack the whites on Joseph Travis's farm, the rebels then made one more decision. They decided to wait until after it was dark to start the revolt. The feast at the Cabin Pond lasted until about 9 or 10 o'clock. The small band then made its way to the Travis farm. The first person they encountered was Austin, another one of the 8 slaves who lived on the farm. Since Austin lived and worked on a small farm with 2 of the revolt's leaders, they must have known him well. Yet Nat Turner had neither invited Austin to join the conspirators in February, nor had he joined the other rebels earlier in the day at Cabin Pond. Austin's distance from the rebels during the plotting stages supports later impressions that the plot was intentionally kept small during the planning stages. The record leaves no evidence that Austin felt any slight at the rebels' decision not to include him earlier. Instead, he and 6 other rebels headed over to Travis Sider's press to continue the drinking that had begun at Cabin Pond. Jack, the most reluctant rebel, soon slipped away from the others. In the quiet of the night, sitting with his head held in his hand between his knees, he tried to decide what to do. He could have easily awakened the Travis family and warned them about the plot then underway, but he did not. He could have escaped, but he was afraid of Harkin, who had insisted that he had joined. When Moses, a young slave of the farm, approached the unhappy men, Jack explained to him that he was sick and wanted to go home. He was not sure that he was ready to die in this revolt. He had little confidence that the small band of drunk, unarmed slaves and their reclusive prophet would succeed in liberating Southampton slaves. As when Nat Turner's words affected my mind to such a degree that I felt sick, Jack worries soon made him feel physically ill. And by the middle of the night, several hours after he complained about feeling poorly to Moses, Moses saw Jack again in the yard sick. While the others drank and Jack worried, Nat Turner remained by himself alone in a position he would often find himself during a revolt that he had begun and that would eventually best be known by his name. All right, so this stage is set, and first blood is about to be spilled. And I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to let you get the PDF if you want to know more. We're going to go to chapter 4 and see if we can get through it. And if we can, well, then I guess I'll just do it. All right, here we go. So we know what happened. I don't want to incense and inflame. I know we have detractors and oppressors who just yelling my name, but you know the story got better. All right, here we go. Let's see. Chapter 4, The Dawn. Yeah, there's still more. Here we go. Under a brightening morning sky, the group of a dozen slaves, plus or minus one, made their way toward their next target. Home of Nat Turner's former mistress, the widow Elizabeth Turner. In the confessions, Nat Turner did not explain why they selected her house. Personal connections to slaves at his own mistress's plantation may have led him to believe that he would be able to recruit men there. 2 of Elizabeth Turner's slaves joined the revolt. Or he may have wanted revenge against the woman who had been mistress, who inherited his mother when his master died in 1822. If he had wanted revenge for himself or his mother, one should not be surprised that Nat Turner did not tell the whites about it. As forthcoming as he was about his religious inspiration, his confessions sensibly protected his family, hiding any inspiration they may have provided to the revolt. According to the confessions, the rebels reached Elizabeth Turner's house at about sunrise, roughly 5:20 a.m. The revolt, discussed for months, was about 5 hours old, and it had begun well. Up to this point, the rebels had been able to escape detection. They traveled quietly. Twice, Turner described how he marched the rebels off during the night. If they rode the horses they had commandeered, the mounted men rode slowly and quietly, never separating from the men afoot. More surprisingly, the rebels had been able to raid 3 households without being detected. Relying on Will's trusted axe, they had killed 8 whites without firing a shot. The success of these stealthy raids made the rebels' most important jobs easier. In the course of one night, the rebels had increased their number from 7 to about a dozen. They had also started to accumulate arms and horses. In the light of the day, the rebels changed how they conducted their attacks. Instead of focusing on remaining undetected during the day, Nat Turner and his rebels traveled fast. Noise was no longer an anathema, and for the first time, they divided into groups to attack and kill different targets. At Elizabeth Turner's farm, one group, including Henry, Sam, and Austin, went to the farm's still. When they reached the still, they found the overseer, Hartwell Peebles. Austin, the recruit who had joined the revolt at Travis's plantation, shot and killed Peebles. For the first time in the records, one of the rebels used a gun. The silence maintained throughout the night was broken. Now, none of the rebels ever explained the decision to use the gun. Perhaps they had discussed it as a possibility now that the sun was up and Sam Townsend's residents were beginning to awake. Or perhaps the detachment went to the still to get alcohol. Henry, who was with this group, had brought the brandy to the cabin pond and was surprised by Peebles. Without time to react, Austin used the gun to make sure Peebles would not escape. Or maybe Austin, unlike Will, simply preferred shooting a gun to hacking a man to death. Whatever led to Austin to pull the trigger, the gun had sounded. From this moment, the rebels showed little interest in trying to muffle their noises. The two white women in the main house, Elizabeth Turner and Sarah Newsom, may have wondered who fired a gun at 5:30 in the morning. At least one of them looked outside and saw a small contingent of black men, armed and on horseback, approaching their house in the morning light. Recognizing danger immediately, women barricaded themselves in the house. Their task was impossible. In addition to the doors, the house had 11 windows and 6 rooms. Aware that they had been seen and unconcerned about detection, the main force of rebels used the tactic that Hawk had suggested at Travis' house. Will approached the farmhouse with a single swing, broke down the front door. Against armed slaves, women were defenseless. Slaves found the white women in the middle of a large front room, according to Nat Turner, almost frightened to death. Will attacked Elizabeth Turner and killed her with one blow of an axe. At the same time, Nat Turner attacked Sarah Newsom. He grabbed her hand and struck her several times over the head with his dull sword. Again, as with Joseph Travis, Turner could not kill his victim. Will, turning from Elizabeth Turner's lifeless body, realized that Nat Turner was struggling to kill Sarah Newsom. Will dispatched her also. Up to this point in the revolt, 10 whites had died, and Will had delivered the death blows to 6. Only one of the first 10 deaths, Peebles, was attributed to someone other than Will. No primary evidence suggests what the slaves took during the requisite destruction of property and search for money and ammunition. Betty Powell Barnes' memory of the capture of Elizabeth Harris's slave Joe implied that one of the newest recruits used this opportunity to acquire some goods. After the revolt, Joe was identified wearing the clothes of Hartwell Peebles. At the same time that Joe filched some of Peebles' clothing, the others were busy recruiting more slaves to join the revolt. As usual, the insurgents relied on threats to urge Elizabeth Turner's slaves to risk death and join the revolt. The slaves found Davy before he got dressed for the day. According to the testimony of young Moses, the rebels told Davy that if he did not join them, he should die there. After weighing his options, Davy put on his clothes and went off with the insurgents. Another slave belonging to Elizabeth Turner, Jordan, also joined the rebellion. All right, so, we got quite a show, don't we? Nat Turner not just a befuddled, ignorant slave with no sense and no mind that just began to murder. No, 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 a well thought out, thoughtful, inspired Negro who did what he thought he needed to do and did it. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This has never left the minds of our oppressors. This activity, this action, they all know who Nat Turner is now, don't they? Just as well as they know who Martin Luther King is. And they know the implications of simply uttering those two words. And so it is imperative that we Negroes understand what occurred back long ago to a slave that had the nerve to stand up to caucasity. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna end the show there, and we're gonna go to part 2 tomorrow. We're gonna conclude and take note of this well put together dissemination. The details are shocking. The details are mind rocking, and the gravitas, the balls on this guy, huh? Of course. What else would we expect? What would they do? What would they do? I mean, I'll say Nat Turner's name all day. I'll wear a shirt. And if any of them has the temerity to walk up to me and ask me the meaning, I would ask them, what would you do under the same circumstances? All right. Well, I do appreciate everyone being here. I do hope everyone got a good insight as to the attitudes of slaves within this country in the early 1800s. And for God's sakes, folks, understand that their attitude is coming back. Why shouldn't ours? All right, that's it. I'm done. You guys, I got to run. It's the Doug Rice Show. Thank you so much to Trina. Thank you so much for Antoine Anderson. If he's there, I don't know if he's there. He hasn't been there. He's working. I, too, must get my butt in gear. I got stuff I got to do and things I got to listen to and hear. And okay. All right, folks, I got to go. It's Thursday, so you know, take care. This is the Doug Rice Show. Bye. Shit. It's this Nat Turner. It's just, you know, gets under your skin. Listen, folks, it's Thursday. I know. You know, according to the government, they'll be shut down on Saturday. So, listen, you might want to at least take some time to consider your position in this place. If it all goes to hell, believe me, you want to stay out of their face. They're going to have an attitude if they ain't getting paid. Okay? All right? And so this weekend, as you all know, I'll be doing the Doug Rice Show on Sunday. But tomorrow we'll cover chapter 2 of this. So it's a show I'm sure you won't want to miss. But I do want to leave you with this. I know you got to be out there in them public places. But if you do, do me a favor. Get that goddamned grin off your faces. Appreciate it.